Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Good morning, everyone. I think it's still morning. Yeah, it's still morning. First of all, thank you very much to all the organizers of this wonderful event. I'm honored to be here. Inshallah, I'll be presenting my paper on nutrition quality of canteen foods in primary public schools over 2 academic years. In my basic outline, inshallah, I'll be just going over the basic structure of a research. But in introduction, I wanted to highlight some really important points, which were actually the driving points for the research. That number one, proper nutrition in childhood promotes well-being and also not only affects them in childhood, but also helps them prevent adulthood chronic diseases. And there is an alarming increase in the rate of obesity and um, nutrition-related diseases in Oman and worldwide. So, according to the WHO, I mean, not only that when we usually we look at extremely developed countries and we're thinking that, yeah, because of the trend and the economic status, where there might be a higher number of obesity, but even in developing countries, there is a high increase of obesity and nutrition-related diseases. More than a quarter or a fourth of the food or the energy that kids get is most often from snacks. And most of you probably do have your own children, and you'll notice that it's just something they constantly do. They're always snacking, and a big amount of their energy comes from snacks. Not only does nutrition play a role in their general health and preventing diseases, but also extensive research has shown in different countries, different areas that specifically food programs or school feeding programs did have an impact on the academic status of these children. So they noticed that it significantly improved enrollment and attendance once they implemented school feeding programs. Secondly, there was an increase in grades completed and a decrease in dropout rate. So kids were staying in school for longer and leaving school less or dropping out from school less. And there was an improvement in cognitive development and learning achievements. And when you actually think about that, logically, if the body is well fed, then a brain is well fed and will have more energy and more ability to perform better in school. But that's the thing is where specifically in school, because they spend such a long time in school, so a lot of times we don't really give too much attention to what they're eating during that period. So now in Oman, we have general guidelines in school canteens. So basically, there are two lists. One that has foods that are allowed to be served in canteens, and for foods that are not. So foods that are not allowed include things like fizzy drinks. I think now there's potato chips, things like that. So you have things that are basically allowed and things that are not allowed. But school food until now has not been assessed in terms of nutritional value. So what is the current status? What is the nutritional value of these foods, even if they're compliant to the general guidelines that are provided? So the objective of our research was to assess and compare the nutritional quality of foods provided in a sample of government primary schools based on nutrition density over 2 years. So we did that. We were working over 2 full years to come up with just kind of understanding of what's going on. When we selected the schools in Asib Wilaya, cycle one. So cycle one is first to fourth grade. So we selected Asib because it had the highest population of students. So we have approximately 35,000, 35,000 students in Muscat in cycle one, and 17,500 were specifically from Asib. So it serves the highest population. So that's why we wanted to target that in specific. Any schools with a population less than 500 were discarded. Why did we do that? Is because most of the schools were above 500. So we wanted to avoid any bias of having very small schools, because small schools, they go through different processes and it's a different management system when you have a small number versus when you have a big number in schools. So 8 schools were selected randomly, and that represented a third of the schools in Sib Wilaya. First off, approval was provided by the Ministry of Education, of course, and then we developed a survey. The idea of the survey was to collect main information. We wanted to know what are the practices that the canteens are doing, how many students are in the school, how is the canteen run, what does the school have to do with the canteen, things like that. And then after that, a sample of all foods and beverages sold in the school were collected across a week. So we visited the school every day for a week and collected one of every single thing that is sold. And we also, one of the things that we paid attention to is that these are items that are always sold, not items that are just there maybe for a specific occasion or things. This is the normal pattern of foods that are snacks that are being served in the school. Samples were then marked and they were photographed, weighed, and frozen. And then we collected or we noted the nutritional facts two ways. One was by food labels. If the foods were packaged, we used the labels. And USDA Food Data Central, where it's a food database where we try to find the closest match to these food items in order to retrieve the nutritional information from these specific food samples. Okay, moving on. So, okay, we collected everything. So how are we assessing it? How are we determining is this or the quality of these? So we go back to standards. One of the standards that we found very useful was the USDA A Guide to Smart Snacks in School. That was we used the 2019 version. And so basically what the Smart Snack Guide does, it has specifications. So regardless to what company you deal with, regardless to where you get the food from, it needs to fit into certain guidelines to be specified or to be called a smart snack. Or in our case, we would say that that would be a high value or high quality nutritional food. So first off, to qualify to be a smart snack, you have the food item or the snack has to be a grain product that has 50% or more of the grain to be whole grain. So if it's a grain product, it needs to be 50% or more whole grain, or it has to have fruit or vegetables, dairy products, or protein foods as the first ingredient. As most of you know, first ingredient means the majority of that food item is created by this ingredient. So that has to be either fruit or vegetable, dairy or protein, or it should be a combination food that contains at least a fourth of a cup of fruit or vegetables. So it can be something with a lot of other things, but it has to contain this much of fruit and vegetables. And finally, it has to meet nutritional standards of calories, sodium, sugar, and fats. So it has to have at least 200 calories or less to be to qualify to be a smart snack. It has to have 200 milligrams or less sodium. 35% of the calories or less are from fat. So it cannot be above 35% of the calories be coming from fat. And specifically, no more than 10% coming from saturated fats. So even if the product has, let's say, 10% or 20% of total fats, it can't have more than 10% of the total calories coming from saturated fats. There's zero trans fats should be there, and less than 35% of the weight of the snack should be coming from sugar. So these, we have three qualitative and we have 6 quantitative standards, but you have to meet one of the qualitative and all of the nutritional standards. So I can't have something that has low calories but has high sodium. That would kind of like fail the test, you'd say. And then, so how we evaluated the foods, we went by every single criteria. So we broke down the foods into different nutritional values, nutrition facts. We collected for all the snacks, and then we assessed them based on the criteria that are provided, by the guidelines from the USDA. And for every criteria that was met, we gave a point for that specific snack meeting the guidelines. So if you met 7 of them, which was what is requested, you're qualified to be a high nutrition quality snack. And then we wanted to assess between schools. So we wanted to see, is there a difference between schools. Do we have schools that are performing very well, and do we have schools that are performing poorly, or are they around the same level, to kind of also get an understanding of what's going on. So descriptive statistics and chi-square tests were conducted to compare the rate of meeting nutrition quality between the schools that we were assessing. Okay, so in results, first off, we selected 8 schools, but only 7 schools were assessed because one school unfortunately refused to participate. So the data you're seeing is from 7 schools right now. The number of students served in the schools in the first year, we had 5,222 students, and the schools that we visited in the second year were serving 5,625 students, which is quite a big number of kids when you think about it. The number of varieties served in the first year were 46 different snacks across all schools. The different snacks were 46 different ones, and in the second year they were 52. So as I mentioned earlier, that in the survey, we wanted to know how schools are run, because how school canteens are run, because school canteens are run different ways. We found out that all the schools we visited were ran by external SMEs, or small and medium enterprises, which means the school had minimal interaction or minimal control over the canteen specifically. So the SMEs follow the guidelines from the Ministry of Education, and the school, basically, they'll just check to make sure that they're complying to the guidelines, their like expiration dates, things like if they're maintaining cleanliness, hygiene, things like that. So for all those snacks and all that analysis, what we wanted to find out, how many actually meet the guidelines. So we can see here in the first year, out of the 46 snacks, only 11 were compliant, and in the second year, 52 from 52, we only had 12 that actually met the guidelines. So if you actually look at how much of that, when we're saying that we try, I mean, I'm sure many people are trying to achieve healthy snacks, but in reality, how many of those are more on the more nutritious side? We can see that it's quite low. Furthermore, we wanted to take it and see where exactly are we failing. So yeah, I can tell you right now that they're not meeting guidelines, but what exactly is the problem? What is wrong with these specific foods that is making them not meet the guidelines? Where do we need to change? So this is for year 1. In year 1, we noticed that whole grain, no food was whole grain, 50% whole grain. None of the snacks provided. And a very small amount did have the first ingredient as fruit and vegetables. None were combinations with 4th cup of fruit and vegetables. And when it came to calories, luckily a lot of them did meet this guideline. They were less than 200 calories. Also in sodium, which was, at least that was a bit of a relief, that many of them did actually meet the guidelines in sodium, with being less than 200 milligrams of sodium. However, a little issue was, or it's not a little issue, it's quite a big issue, was total fat. So less than half of them met the guidelines in fat, which means more than half were actually having more than 35% of the calories coming from fat in that snack. So when I'm saying snack, I'm talking about one serving. More than 35% of the calories were coming from fat. And specifically, a lot of them did have more than 10% coming from saturated fats. Very few did note that they're containing trans fats, but the only worry we had about trans fat is that, because as of now we don't have guidelines that, we don't have like regulation guidelines that ensure that trans fats are noted with all the foods. So that might be absence of data rather than absence of actual trans fats. When it came to sugar, also we had just around 20% of them having more than 35% of the weight coming from sugar. The rest actually did have less than that. In the last column here, it's just overall kind of the percentage of the snacks that kind of met overall. So we're having a lot of them did not meet. Next off, this is year 2. We have the same issue, no whole grains. We have just a little bit more of foods that have the first ingredient being fruits and vegetables. Combination foods, none. And calories were still kind of okay, 20% were out of the picture. Sodium less this year. So we have less schools that didn't meet the criteria, more of them met. But we still have the issue with total fats and saturated fats. There's still a high amount of the snacks, more than half of the snacks are not meeting this one. They're having more than 35% of their calories coming from fats and more than 10 from saturated fats. Trans fats, none reported. And sugar, also, we're still kind of in the same zone of having 35% of the weight coming from sugar. And overall, we're still, again, around kind of the same range of just a bit, tiny bit over 20% of the snacks meeting guidelines. So what we wanted to do, okay, now we know the basic picture of what the snacks are. So between schools, we wanted to know, like, are all of the healthy snacks coming from one school? Like, is one school doing extremely bad that they're just destroying what data we're seeing? So we tested them by chi-square, and we noticed that there is no significance between the schools. And then we confirmed the test using Fisher's exact test, and that also confirmed that there is no significance between them, meaning that pretty much all of the schools are kind of doing the same. They're kind of on the same path, which means that if we're having this issue, we need to not only tackle 1, 2, 3 schools, it's a problem that we need to tackle throughout the schools. In conclusion, we concluded that the nutrition quality of canteen foods in public primary schools in a SEEB district is low. And there is a noticeable high fat content in the snacks served in the schools. In our recommendations, the tool we found extremely helpful. So the USDA Guide to Smart Snacks in School is a practical tool to assess nutrition quality, and actually we noticed that it can be adapted in Omani school systems. But further further studies are needed to improve the nutrition quality of food. And we started at SEEB, so we might want to research might want to be done in like more of an extensive area over Muscat, or how to do it just to kind of understand, and more research needs to be done to improve in order to provide higher quality, nutritious food for students during the school hours. With that, I conclude my presentation. I hope everything is clear, and I look forward to hearing from you guys in the Q&A session. Thank you very much for